There was a question sent to me that was simple on the surface. A relationship ended abruptly. The reasons were complicated, and nearly a year later, the man is still carrying that weight. Not the person, the unfinishedness of it. The sense that something was left open, that something wasn't resolved, that there is a loose thread in the psyche that keeps pulling at him. And the question underneath the question is this: is it better to return and settle what was left behind? Or is it better to move on and let time finish what the mind cannot? This is not just a relationship question. It is a question about integrity, about closure, about where a man places his center when something meaningful ends without ceremony. It is also a question about the function of relationship itself. Because most men are not taught what relationships are for. They are taught what relationships should feel like. They are taught what relationships should provide. They are taught what relationships should prove about themselves. They are not taught the deeper thing, that relationship is the arena where extraction and devotion compete, where the nervous system seeks regulation, where the ego seeks identity, where the soul seeks truth, and where a man is asked again and again not to lose himself while trying to keep someone. Relationships did not begin as romance. They began as structure, tribe, safety, resources, survival. Humans bonded because isolation meant death. And in the modern world, the body has not fully updated its assumptions. A man still reaches for relationship for the same reasons: to feel safe, to feel held, to feel seen, to feel regulated, to access security and resources, to share life, for his needs, his wants, his desires. Some of these are clean, some are not. The mistake is not having needs. The mistake is pretending your needs are spiritual when they are actually survival. The mistake is not having needs. The mistake is pretending your needs are spiritual when they are actually survival. The nervous system wants a place to rest, a place where it can land, a place where vigilance can drop. This is a real function of relationship. And if you deny that, you become dishonest. But if that is the only function, well, the relationship becomes a contract of unconscious bargaining. I will give you this version of me if you will give me safety. I will stay close if you keep me regulated. I will be good if you don't leave. That is not love. That is a nervous system negotiating with fear. The deeper function of relationship is not to remove reality. It is to reveal who you are inside of reality. And relationship exposes how you handle tension, how you handle unmet desires, how you handle delays, how you handle misunderstandings, how you handle your own loneliness, how you handle your own shadow. A man can hide from himself for years alone. In the relationship, the mask has less oxygen. Every relationship contains exchange. Everyone gets something. Everyone wants something. Everyone is in it for something. The lie is pretending this is not true. The question is not whether exchange exists. The question is whether the exchange is conscious and clean, or unconscious and predatory. Extraction is what happens when a man uses relationship to regulate what he refuses to hold himself. Extraction is what happens when a woman or man makes another human being responsible for things like their stability, their meaning and sense of purpose, their worth, their direction, their emotional regulation, their identity. The language may be soft, but the energetic demand is heavy. And naturally it creates resentment because the other person cannot hold what was never theirs to carry. A wholesome relationship is not the absence of need. It is, however, the absence of covert demand. It is the capacity to say internally, I want you, I love you, I value you, but I will not make you my stabilizer. I will not make you my God. I will not make you the structure that prevents me from meeting myself. This is what makes a relationship spiritually aligned in a grounded way. Not fantasies, not performances, not spiritual branding. Alignment is whether both people can remain in integrity while exchanging love, time, care, and life. If a relationship requires self-betrayal to maintain harmony, it is not aligned. It is merely functioning. An unhealthy relationship is not always loud. Sometimes it is polite. Sometimes it is socially impressive. Sometimes it even looks like stability. Unhealthy relationship is where gratification becomes the center, where desire becomes entitlement, where attention becomes currency, where sex becomes a regulator, where promises become tools, where affection becomes conditional. Unhealthy relationship is where people become resources, not in an honest way, in the way a system treats labor: use, consume, replace. This is why so many modern relationships have the same arc: intense bonding, quick fusion, identity inflation, then slow erosion, then detachment, and after disposal. Because they were never rooted in truth. They were rooted in extraction of attention, validation, sex, stability, money, belonging, image, the list goes on. And when that extraction stops producing, like, the relationship is reclassified as not working. Not because love died, because the contract expired. The resource was no longer available. This is the part most people do not admit. Many relationships end not because the people changed, but because the relationship was entered as a transaction that could no longer survive. And that pressure always comes. Delay, conflict, illness, loss, a season where desire dries up, a season where identity shifts and priorities change, a season where life tests whether the bond is real or another performance. An healthy relationship cannot survive that. They require the world to stay favorable. A healthy relationship is not perfect compatibility. A healthy relationship is two people who can remain honest without cruelty. It is care without possession, support without control, love without disappearance. A healthy relationship contains growth, yes, but not motivational growth. Real growth is uncomfortable. It is the willingness to face what is true. The ways you manipulate, the ways you withdraw, the ways you punish, the ways you bargain, the ways you seek reassurance through drama, the ways you use silence as a weapon, the ways you use niceness as a mask. A healthy relationship does not erase shadow. It exposes it without turning it into identity. It is not we never fight. It is we do not destroy each other when tension arises. And beyond that, a healthy relationship has a particular quality. It does not require constant narration to survive. There is a steadiness. Not because things are always smooth, because both people know how to return to center. A spiritually aligned relationship is not one where people speak about spirituality. It is one where truth is not sacrificed to keep the bond. Where the relationship becomes a place where integrity is trained. And trained means tested. This is where the deeper layer arrives. Life cannot be lived without relationships. And yet there are thresholds where relationship cannot come with you. In fear, in grief, in initiation, certain forms of shame, certain forms of existential terror, and ultimately death. There are experiences in a man's life that cannot be outsourced however hard he tries. They cannot be explained away. They cannot be held by another person for you. You can be accompanied, yes. You can be loved, you can be witnessed, but ultimately you still have to walk certain corridors alone. This is why men who build their entire identity around relationship eventually panic. Because when the initiation arrives, relationship cannot save them. And if a man has made relationship his God, he will either demand the partner carry what is impossible, or resent the partner for not being able to do it, or abandon the relationship because it reveals his own nakedness. The sacred approach here is not to reject relationship. It is to understand the hierarchy. There is a partner, there is a tribe, there is a family, there is a community. And then there is the great mystery. And a man who refuses to build a relationship with the great mystery will keep trying to extract eternity from a human being. That is too much weight. On the deathbed, much falls away. Titles, social roles, achievements, image, even relationships in the form we cling to and know. What remains is the internal stance. Did you live in truth? Did you love cleanly? Did you use people, or did you meet them? Did you compromise your soul for comfort? Did you abandon yourself to preserve belonging? This is why relationships must be approached with an awareness of death. Not as morbidity, but as purification. Because death clarifies what matters. And what matters is the quality of your integrity in love. A spiritually integrated masculine man does not treat relationship as a solution. He treats relationship as an arena where his nervous system is tested, an arena where his integrity is tested, an arena where his tendency to collapse, perform, dominate, withdraw, or bargain will be exposed. He enters into a relationship without fantasy, not cynically, without illusion. He does not pretend it will complete him. He does not pretend it will heal him. He does not pretend it will remove his shadow. He understands the purpose. To practice love with a spine. To practice devotion without self-erasure. To practice closeness without control. And he knows that relationship will ask for compromise at times. And he also knows there are things that cannot be compromised. A man, therefore, must know his non-negotiables, not as threats, rather as anchors. Because if he does not, the relationship becomes a slow drift into betrayal, disguised as being reasonable. And eventually, one day, he wakes up and realizes he has been living in a life he did not choose. This is not spirituality or consciousness. That is sleep. A spiritually integrated man keeps one thing intact: internal truth before external agreement. Being in relationship for others in a healthy way is not rescuing them. It is not saving them. It is not being needed. It is not proving yourself through loyalty while portraying your center. A man who is integrated becomes a stable presence. He does not make promises he cannot keep. He does not offer devotion while secretly negotiating exits. He does not perform maturity. He becomes reliable. Reliability is love in action. It is clean. A woman, a partner, a friend, a community, they can feel it and they know it, not because he speaks about his values, because his behavior does not wobble when tension arrives. He can hold silence without punishment. He can hold conflict without escalation. He can hold emotion without fleeing into numbness. And when he cannot, he does not build a story to defend it. He returns to integrity. This is not perfection. It is the refusal to live in self-deception. That is what makes a man safe. Not softness, not niceness. Truth plus containment. Relationships involve compromise, but not all compromise is equal. There is compromise that comes from maturity, adjusting habits, learning communication, honoring differences, making room for others. And there is compromise that comes from fear, bending and contorting your truth, dimming your standards, agreeing to what violates your center, trading your integrity for peace. The second kind rots a man slowly because he begins living in an internal lie. And once you're living in an internal lie, the relationship itself becomes contaminated. Even if it looks stable from the outside. This is where the spiritual backbone matters. A man who is asked to bend must be able to discern. Is this a compromise that builds the relationship? Or is this a compromise that destroys the self? If the relationship requires self-abandonment, it is not love. In those cases, it is attachment plus fear. And if a man cannot stand in that moment, he will pay for it later in things like resentment, in numbness, in passive aggression, in secret exits, in sudden collapse. This is why men sometimes leave out of nowhere. It was never out of nowhere. It was a year of silent self-betrayal. And the psyche can only hold that for so long before it snaps. Where relationships begin matters. What you build in determines what you must maintain with. If a connection is seeded in chaos, it will require chaos to stay alive. If a connection is seeded in avoidance, It will require avoidance to remain comfortable. If a connection is seeded in intoxication, it will eventually demand intoxication, even if the substance leaves and the pattern remains. This is not moralizing, it is simple environment genetics. Seeds grow from the soil they are planted in. Hookup culture often treats bodies and attention as disposable. Fast intimacy, fast access, fast attachment, but fast exit. And then people call the emptiness trauma without recognizing the structure they were participating in. A man who wants a wholesome life cannot plant seeds in poisoned soil and then ask why the fruit tastes bitter. Meeting people in bad places is not about judgment. It is about what the nervous system is doing when it chooses something. Is it seeking numbness? Is it seeking validation? Is it seeking relief? Is it seeking an identity? Or is it choosing from a stable center? The place you meet is often a mirror of the state you were in. And the relationship will be built from that state unless something deeper changes. Divorce is not always failure. Sometimes it is honesty arriving late. But there is a particular modern pattern that is worth naming here. People extract from each other for years. They build a life on dysfunction, shared bills, shared image, shared conveniences, shared children, shared roles. And then, when the extraction no longer satisfies, they throw each other away like a used tissue. And that is brutal. And it reveals the original problem. The relationship was never entered as devotion. It was entered as a strategy. And strategy cannot survive the seasons where the world stops rewarding the arrangement. People rightfully change, yes, but often the relationship was built for the wrong reasons. Built in the ground of fear of being alone, need for validation, need for security without inner security, desire to be chosen more than desire to choose, desire to be saved. And then time passes. The identity shift. The original bargain no longer works. And because devotion was never the bedrock, nothing holds. This is why the question at the beginning matters. When a relationship ends abruptly, and when a man stays haunted for a year, is it not always about love? Or sometimes is it about the unfinished contract? Sometimes is it the psyche still negotiating with what was taken and what was given? So maybe the question becomes, was it love that ended? Or was it the extraction arrangement collapsing? A man must be really honest with himself here, because if he returns to settle things from the place of unresolved extraction, he will only restart the cycle. And if he leaves without facing what was truly happening, he will carry the pattern into the next bond. This is why endings must be met with truth and not with fantasy. There is a way to live in relationship that is not naive and not cynical. A way that is spiritually textured without becoming inflated. It begins with remembering the final threshold. Death. Guaranteed death. Death is the final initiation, the one which strips away all performance, away all image, and along with that, all identity and roles. And it only asks questions that matter. Did you live cleanly? Did you love without using? Did you tell the truth? Did you keep your word? Did you abandon yourself? Did you abandon others? A man who wants peace on the deathbed must live in a way that does not require a rewrite later. He must approach relationship with reverence, with devotion, with realism, reverence for the sacredness of bonding, and realism about extraction and shadow. He must want something deeper than comfort, not drama, not intensity, not constant gratification, peace, truth, understanding. And if there is one thing to carry back to that original question, the question of whether to return or move on, it is this. Do not return to restore comfort. Return only if truth demands completion. And do not move on as an escape. Move on only if integrity requires separation. A man who can make that decision from the center, not from longing, not from guilt, not from unfinished bargaining, that is a man already doing the work. Not relationship work, initiation work. Because the deepest relationship is not with another person. It is with the great mystery, with the deeper self, with God. And when that relationship is intact, a man stops using other humans to fill the void that only the sacred can hold. That is how a relationship becomes wholesome. That is how love becomes clean. That is how a man arrives at the end without regret. There is one more layer that must be spoken plainly, because many men hear all of this and still ask quietly, what do I actually do with the relationship that ended? Not as instruction, not as advice, as orientation. When something ends, without ceremony, the psyche looks for resolution. It imagines that resolution lives in conversation, in explanation, in revisiting the scene. Sometimes that is true. Often it is not. Often what the psyche is actually seeking is relief from the ambiguity of it all. And ambiguity is not resolved by returning to the past. It is resolved by seeing clearly what the relationship actually was. Not what it promised, not what it symbolized, not what it represented at the time, what it actually functioned as. Was it a place of genuine meeting, or a place where both people were regulating something they could not yet hold alone? Was it devotion, or was it an agreement built around mutual avoidance? Was it love with truth, or was it closeness purchased with silence? These are not questions to be answered quickly. They are not answered in our heads either. They are answered by sitting still long enough that the nervous system stops bargaining. Because as long as the body is still seeking relief, the mind will manufacture reasons to return. And as long as the body is still avoiding grief, the mind will manufacture reasons to move on prematurely. This is why many men oscillate for years. Not because the relationship was profound, because the lesson was never metabolized fully. A clean ending does not always involve the other person. Sometimes the clean ending happens when a man stops rehearsing the alternative futures, stops imagining the conversation that will finally settle in, stops trying to reclaim dignity retroactively. There is a kind of dignity that cannot be restored by explanation, only by standing differently afterwards. This is one of the most uncomfortable things, because it removes the fantasy of closure as an event and replaces it with closure as a stance. A man knows that he's integrated a relationship when he no longer needs the other person to agree with his version of events, when he can hold the truth of what happened without defending himself and without indicting the other. This does not mean forgiveness. It means non-distortion. It means the story has stopped being used as a regulator. This is also where men must be careful not to spiritualize avoidance. Not every return is attachment. Not every leaving is growth. A man can leave because he is afraid of being seen. A man can return because he is afraid of being alone. Both are avoidance. The sacred path is not defined by movement. It is defined by contact with truth. And truth is rarely dramatic. Truth often feels simple, heavy, and unsatisfying to the ego. Truth often sounds like, it was what it was. I learned what I needed to learn. And I will not build the next bond from the same soil. That is not closure as relief. That is closure as orientation correction. This is why relationship must be placed inside of initiation. Because initiation teaches a man that not everything unresolved is meant to be revisited. Some things are meant to be carried through until they complete themselves internally. Grief completes itself. Shame completes itself. Loss completes itself. Not through more explanations, through presence. And when presence is there, the compulsion to act dissolves. This returns us, finally, to death. Not as an abstract idea, as a calibrator. Imagine yourself at the end of life, looking back at relationships, at the pattern of how you loved. Did you enter relationships to be met or to be rescued? Did you stay to preserve truth or to preserve comfort? Did you leave because integrity demanded it? Or because staying required you to grow beyond what you were ready for? Did you speak honestly when it mattered? Or did you let time do the talking because it was much easier? These are not moral judgments. These are the orientation correction markers, and they matter because death is mercilessly honest. It does not care how justified you felt. It cares whether you lived cleanly or not. A man who wants peace at the end must practice clean relationship now. That does not mean perfect relationship. It means relationships centered around self-worth without self-deception. Relationships held without extraction. Relationships ended without distortion. It means knowing when to fight for truth and when to release without drama. It means refusing to use love as substitute for inner work, and refusing to use spirituality as a substitute for courage. So if there is only one thing to leave standing, one thing to carry forward, it is this. Do not ask whether you should return or move on. Ask whether your center is intact. If returning requires you to shrink, explain, bargain, or betray yourself, it is not truth. If moving on requires numbness, distraction, or denial, it is not truth. Truth will ask you to stand, and standing is often quiet, often uncelebrated, unresolved in the way the mind wants, but clean, and cleanliness is what the soul recognizes when everything else falls away. That is how relationship becomes initiation. That is how love becomes devotion without illusion. That is how a man lives in a way that does not require apology at the end. That is how a man approaches death without needing to rewrite his story. And that is enough.